So today I'm very happy to be presenting you a researcher that I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. This man is researching on childless men, and he's also the co-founder of a groundbreaking project in the UK, which is called Aging Without Children. So, good morning or good night, Robin. How are you today?
Welcome. Hello, everyone. I'm very well today, thank you.
And Robin, could you present yourself and explain us why you decided to study childless men? What brought you to this?
Okay, I was doing a master's course in counselling, and for the dissertation, you have to do something about yourself. And I recalled that in my 30s, I was very broody. I was desperate to become a father. And in line with my supervisor, she said, I've never heard of anything like that. So I decided to look at the desire for fatherhood and what that meant. And for that project, I interviewed 10 men. And their stories are so intense and personal. But one of the things that came out was they'd never spoken to anybody else about it. Or maybe one or two had spoken to their partner, but that was it. And there was no narrative, social narrative, for men to access or interface with. And also, there was no record about childlessness of men. I talk with my hands a lot, I'm sorry.
It's okay, it's perfect.
And why was that? When women are recorded and their fertility intentions and history are recorded by society quite a lot.
Yes.
It's not happening with men. So we really don't know how many childless men there are in the world, although we've got a good idea of how many childless women there are. And that's significant if you're doing policies around fertility, treatments. If your policy is based on just 50% of the population, it's going to be a bit skewed and wrong. So that really attracted me was there wasn't anything out there. And also that research really said there is a story here and that's not being told. And so that sort of drove me to then do an MSc, which is to find the level of broodiness of the desire for parenthood between men and women, with children and without children. But the main aim was to find out that level between men and women of the desire to become a parent. Because my assumption was that it was all women and men weren't bothered. And that's sort of backed up in infertility treatment, actually, and research would tend to say the men aren't interested. But what I found was it's about the same level for men and women, slightly more for women, slightly higher, but it's about the same. And that just seems so incredible to me that that was just me doing my little study. That no nation has really done that.
It's
when it's so
incredible.
Important.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I think it really is very important that we should know what those levels are, because then the narratives around men and what men should be, rather than the he-man, whoa, very go out there, casual sex, drinking, work, all those activities outside the self, aren't true for actually what men's experience are. And it denies them that internal experience and that feeling if there's no societal structure or narrative in place for them to grab hold of, whereas there is for women about reproduction quite a lot, whether you choose to have become a parent or not. There's a whole range of stories you can hold on to and pick and choose. But for men, it's not the same. Sorry, I think I've just gushed at you there.
It's wonderful because I'm hearing what you're saying, and tons of questions are popping in my mind right now. And the first one is I was curious to know, are you the only man researching on this in the world, or do you know if other men are doing what you're doing? I was puzzled about that question.
It's a really good question. There's a lot of work going on about reproduction and demographics, particularly in Australia, China, but that's sort of big numbers research. On individual experience, there's a lot more research on women's experience of infertility treatment and voluntary childlessness or being child-free.
Yeah, yes.
Excuse me. There's some on men in infertility research and the impact that has on them, but not much, actually. So I hate to claim I'm the only researcher in the world doing this. I'm the only one I know. There we go.
Wow. Congratulations. It's
Thank you.
Extraordinaire. Robin, are you a childless man too?
I am. Yeah, I'm an involuntary childless man. Involuntary childlessness is usually associated with infertility treatment. It's a term that the infertility industry, and it is an industry, uses for people who have exited infertility treatment or exited it, unsuccessful infertility treatment. But in fact, there's lots of people like me who never accessed infertility treatment, who wanted to have children but don't. So that's why I class myself as involuntarily childless man. But if you sometimes talk to psychologists or researchers, they immediately link involuntary childlessness with infertility. But it's really older than that to me. So yes, I am
an
involuntary childless man.
Did you have to go through a grieving process like women go through when they can't or they don't have children for many reasons?
Yes, it's an ongoing process.
Of course.
So grief along infertility is a very complex bereavement process. And I think in my mid-30s in particular, I was very strongly desiring to become a father. That's terrible English, but there we go. Like all English people, I'm terrible at my own language. Well, most English people. So I think it came when I think in my mid-30s I was quite angry or frustrated about what to do about this situation I was in. And some men that I've spoken to, who actually contacted me, who are now fathers, said that they were quite angry, frustrated in their mid and late 30s. And these are guys who are late fathers, so when they became fathers in their early 40s, now looking back, they realised their frustration was about not being a father.
Yes.
But what they didn't connect with at the time was that was the issue. It's only once they became a father, it sort of went, that's why I was frustrated and grumpy and went out drinking and trying to find a partner desperately and was very driven. But what they didn't connect was that internal feeling to the external activity.
Did you have access to any type of help as a man? Is there any structure to support men in the UK?
No. No, not really. I think if you're in infertility treatment, then there's counselling as part of that. I think reports from that counselling is that men tend not to access it as much as the women. Part of that is that counselling is quite a feminised space, really. And you can say women are socialised to communicate on a one-to-one level and very easy to talk about feelings because that's how you're brought up. Generally, not everyone, but generally. And men are socialised to be active outside themselves, to go out and do things. And in the internal stuff is repressed, and that's a social thing. So becoming a father is fundamental, I think, to a lot of men. But what they can't do is get the connection between the internal feelings and that desire and verbalise it in the same way that women can. And that's a socialisation thing. Unless you've been to counsellor training like me, in which case, hooray, you can talk about yourself and your inner feelings without embarrassment, although I feel myself going red now I'm saying that.
Don't worry, that happens to me all the time.
Okay, so I guess men can access counselling. Well, I don't think there's a particular school of counselling training that would actually focus on men's desire to become a parent and a subsequent bereavement of not becoming a parent.
That's very, very, very interesting what you're saying, Robin. What is the work to be done in the group that you co-created about aging without children? Why did you? I think you decided to create that with other members. Could you name these members and explain us what you're trying to do with this great project?
Okay, thank you. In I guess the West generally, there's a narrative from government and politicians that your family will look after you when you get older.
Yes.
And in Britain, all the politicians are using hard-working families, which is a bit of a joke, really. But so families will look after you when you get older, even though older people tend to say, I don't want my family to look after me. I want to be independent and look after myself. I don't want to be a burden to my children. So there's an agreement there. However, in reality, when you get older and things start to fail, quite often, and it's usually the women, the daughters start to support their parents in maybe getting some shopping, calling, that sort of thing, and informal care. And a lot of societies actually rely on that informal care to keep those older people out of hospitals and institutions and costing the society to look after them. If you don't have a child, what's going to happen to you when you get old and maybe you can't function as well as you can? It's a bit difficult getting to the shops or doing things. And there's nothing in policy about that. All the policies, certainly in Britain, and I think we can generally say in the Western world, there could be cultural differences depending where you are in the world, are based on families, that you will have a family. That in documents that I've looked at from the government to do with ageing policy and how it's going to get funded and what facilities are going to be there, there's nothing about childless people. So who's your main contact, who's going to be a beneficiary of your will, that will be all there, and it will be assumed that it's going to be a son or a daughter.
Yes.
And that if you need to be institutionalised for whatever reason, that duty to sign the form will go to your son or your daughter. So that's a really big thing, particularly in Britain. In about 2030, it's predicted to be at least 2 million people without children aged over 65. And that's going to increase. And one of the reasons that's going to increase is there's lots of people that are childless, maybe because their children have died.
Yes.
Or they've split up from their children. And the hard-working families that politicians refer to are always nice families that don't have arguments and are always, a little house on the prairie sort of thing. Yeah. But a lot of families change over time, and there's battles between siblings and parents. and divorce comes into this. You may be a biological parent, but divorced away from your biological children. You may become a step parent in a further relationship, and then there's a thing that those children might say, well, we're not biologically related to Robin, so why should we actually do anything for him? He had a relationship with our mother. Yeah. We never liked him, so let him go rot. So it's a very complex population, the older childless people. And so some people with children will call themselves childless if there's been some sort of estrangement or breakup. And what happens then to those people when they get ill and the doctor comes round and they need some form of help and support? And even if in Britain is very much a policy of trying to keep people in their own homes and maintain their dignity and autonomy. And so you may get equipment fitted to your home. But who's going to deal and negotiate with the services to make sure they come on time, and what happens if they break and stuff like that? Sometimes you just need an advocate or an intermediary, and generally that would fall on your son or daughter. And if you don't have that, what happens? So that's what we really want to get in, is actually this population is recognised, and that this policy's got to be adapted, and it will be good for people with children, because a lot of people with children, like I said, say, well, I don't want my child to look after me. But if you ask them, what have you done then? What have you put in place so your child doesn't have to look after you? It's nothing.
Yes.
And so that's where we're at on that. I hope that was clear.
It's very clear, and it's wonderful, and I think it's a very important work. And then there's, I think you are probably also thinking about alternatives for housing for these people that are going to grow old. We're part of these people. And are you thinking about co-housing projects, or developing that kind of projects, or approaching architect or people that could work on these? Are you addressing this issue too, or?
The organisation is a bit ad hoc at the moment. We have no funding. We're just doing it in between doing there's 4 members, between doing other things, and we're trying to get everything set up. So we're really collecting data. That's a really important question about accommodation. If you're LGBTI, for example, there's a lot of debate in that community about, well, should we have a separate spaces for LGBTI? And some people are for that. Other people say, no, it'd be too enclosed, and I move between different communities, and I want to keep that. And yes, if you're older and a single male or single female, you may not want to live in a multi-accommodation residence. So it's all very complex, that area. And yeah, it's something we want to look at. There's a lot of things we want to look at, but we're a very new organisation. But that's a great area. And actually to raise that and get that into policy, a lot of policy around accommodation is actually based on women. Because historically, women lived longer than men. Men worked, then died. And so the accommodation was sort of geared more to the feminine way. So it's a feminized space. And sometimes when men go into residential care, there's usually only a few men, but they find it a bit difficult because it is a feminized space, and they usually have to try and make a room where they can do a workshop or be a bit of a male bonding room.
So, Robin,
yes.
To end this great conversation, I just have one more question to ask you today. Could you tell us what is the biggest taboo around childless men right now? What you would like to communicate to us that is very, very important, and that what we should know about childless men?
Okay, what a great question. One of the biggest taboos that the men that I've interviewed have always said is that they fear being seen a paedophile. And that's common for men now, that although they want to have a relationship with children, like a grandfather relationship or a father relationship, they're very scared about being seen a paedophile. So although they may want to enjoy kids playing in the park, that sort of thing, they're very aware of that and of being labelled that. So that's one big thing, that not all men are paedophiles, the majority aren't. And that abuse is generally more associated with family and generational family issues. For men, one thing I think we need to, policy-wise, is actually start counting how many men are childless, because we don't know, and then how many would have liked to have been fathers, and because there could be a great cohort of men there who will make great classroom assistants, or helping teenagers negotiate that level from being a child/adult into work. So there's a whole resource there that we could well be missing out on that would really improve society. And I think we've got to get men's stories out so that men can actually say, well, I listened to Robin Hadley and I'm not like him, I'm not as bad as him. What I'm like is this. But at the moment, they have nobody to bounce off, no narratives to draw on or deny or work with. So there's something about getting this work out there. And some people have had contact from Norwegian journalists who said there's some Norwegian scientists who said there's no link between childlessness and depression. Well, yes, there is.
Yes.
What we haven't done is looked for it for men. I mean, in infertility research, there definitely is, isn't there? Again, infertility research very heavily based on women, but there is some about men. So there's something about actually getting the powers that be to listen, and there's maybe something socially about power, men in power who don't like men, who don't conform to the virile, go-getting, successful ideal. But hardly anybody fits any ideal. We're all some way below it. Some are near it, some are way below. I'm way below.
Wow. Well, Robin, I think what you're doing is very, very important for men, for childless men. And I was very glad to talk to you today. And if I can support your work in any way, just let me know. And I'll be very happy to help you get this narrative out there and help other men to come to terms with childlessness and to feel fulfilled as men in this society that we live in. So thank you very much, Robin, and we'll keep in touch if you'd like to.
Oh, I'd love to, and really thank you for interviewing me. It's been lovely. It's great to speak, and I hope people understood my accent, and merci beaucoup.
Oh, merci. Au revoir.
Au revoir.